I'd like to welcome everyone to this Askwith Forum, and just to give you just an overview, a very brief one, and that is to say that the Askwith Forums held here at HGSE are part of a series of public lectures that bring leaders in the field to come and speak with us at HGSE to share new knowledge, to generate spirited conversations, and offer insight into the highest priority challenges facing education. It is also a prominent way that we have here at our school to reach out into the larger community. And as I said at the onset, this Institute, this particular forum is in conjunction with the Women in Education Leadership, which is a Programs in Professional Education Institute. That's a mouthful. Okay. That's just to tell you why we are in this space, but it is my esteemed pleasure to tell you the person for whom we have gathered and from whom we are going to learn a great deal. Farah Pandith is currently a fellow at the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. On January 31st, 2014, she completed a decade of public service in various roles, from the White House to the United States Department of State. Just prior to coming to Harvard, she was appointed the first ever special representative to Muslim communities in June 2009 by then Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton. She reported directly to the Secretary of State, and I think she has some wonderful stories to share about that. Under the leadership of Secretary John Kerry, the Office of the Special Representative has continued to be responsible for executing a vision for engagement with Muslims around the world based on a people-to-people and organizational level. In years since her swearing in, Special Representative Pandith has traveled to more than 80 countries and launched youth-focused initiatives including Generation Change, Viral Peace, and Hours Against Hate, a campaign that was a partner with the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games. She is also a key architect of the Women in Public Service project. If it sounds like she is a phenomenal woman, she really is. In January 2013, she was awarded the Secretary's Distinguished Honors Award, which is given for, quote, exceptionally outstanding service to the agencies of the United States government, resulting in achievements of marked national or international significance. Pandith has served on several boards with a focus on international affairs, including the World Affairs Council of Boston. She is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. She received a master's degree from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, where she specialized in international security studies, Islamic civilizations, and Southwest Asia and international negotiation and conflict resolution. She concentrated on the insurgency in Kashmir and has spoken on the subject in international and domestic forums. She received an AB in Government and Psychology from Smith College, and I think that we have a Smithy or two in the audience, where she was president of the student body, a story in and of itself that we will hear about. She has served as a trustee of alma mater Smith College and Milton Academy, and is currently a member of the Board of Overseers of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Truly, all of these things have been done by one woman. Please join me in bringing to the stage and giving her a Harvard welcome, the Honorable Farah Anwar Pandith. So my idea of a Askwith Forum was to now take a seat and have her lecture, but that is not how she thought we might best do this, and so I think she is very, very right. And so she and I are going to have a conversation for a while, and then we will open it up to you for Q&A with her. So I'm very, very happy that you're here, and I think we're all delighted that you're here. People in the audience may not know that we share a critical connection, and that is that you and the HGSE share our former dean, Dean Kathy McCartney, who is now the president of your alma mater, Smith College, which is a small world. And it was at Kathy McCartney's installation that I got to meet Farah and decided, boy, we need to, if they stole Kathy from us, then we need to bring her here. So let me just start by asking you to talk, if you would, about your formative years, how you got to Smith, and how going to Smith, an all-women's college, was a defining moment in your life.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today, and it's wonderful to be on the Harvard campus. You heard in my intro that I'm an Institute of Politics fellow, and I literally finished the State Department on January 31st and started as a fellow on February 3rd. I had the weekend. It was awesome. But Massachusetts is home, so it's really wonderful to come back home, and Harvard has welcomed me so beautifully, so I want to thank you for that, and this is a tremendous pleasure. How did I get to Smith College? I went to a private school outside of Boston called Milton Academy, K through 12, and I was wondering about that. I thought it was very, very quiet. How's that? Better? There we go. I thought, boy, they have some special equipment at Harvard. It's very quiet. So I went to a private school outside of Boston called Milton Academy, and really loved being at Milton and had a wonderful time. And when I was looking at colleges, it was important for me to find a place that I felt was indicative of the person that I was. And many of my classmates and friends went to very large universities, including this one. But for me, I didn't apply to big schools. I applied to small colleges that I thought I would be comfortable in, and in which they had a legacy that I could connect to. And what do I mean by that? I remember very distinctly reading about the seven sister colleges, now 5 all-women's colleges. And there's a special ethos about these places that are palpable when you even walk on the campus. And when I was applying to Smith, I began to look at the legacy of women that came before me, and it was inspiring. And it was part of this narrative that I thought, my goodness, these are the kinds of people they produce. And so I was very fortunate to get into Smith and had an amazing time there, and feel very privileged to have Kathy as our new president. I'm sorry. We're very happy to have her.
We have a wonderful new dean.
Yes.
I don't want to say that,
yeah.
but
we miss friends.
Kathy.
I understand. I understand.
So you got to Smith, and there was some interesting facets, I think, of your life that got you on that path. Can you talk to us about Mom and the work that she did and the family structure in which you grew up?
So one of the things that I think we all understand is that in the formative years, we really began to understand who we are. And for me, certainly in high school, and I was always somebody who wanted to take part in my community. I was always interested in what was taking place, and so I ran for student government in high school and did that. And so when I got to college, it was very natural that I would also look at the Smith College campus and say, this is something I wanted to do too. I felt as though I had communication skills. I was very comfortable with groups. I wanted to hear everybody's perspective, and so I ran for Senate and various things on Smith College, Student Government Association. And by the time I was a senior, I had run for student body president and luckily won. But it was important because for me, it wasn't about the office, it was about making sure that the things that were happening in that community were being heard. And that in the role in student government, you have a chance to talk to the administration about issues that were taking place. And because Smith is a very small school compared to Harvard, we had real access to the president of the college. And so I would meet with her regularly every week. We had a standing meeting, and certainly after I became a student, after I graduated from Smith, I was on the board of trustees so there's a special relationship in terms of leadership and understanding community. But Smith is where I polished my leadership skills. It's where I learned how to lead. It is where I learned how to hear and how to listen. Because a lot happened during the 4 years that I was at Smith that I feel back, if I look back now on my life, some pivotal aspects of my life happened because I happened to be at Smith College at that time.
Mm-hmm. There was something really special that happened as you were student body president, and you had an interaction with former First Lady Barbara Bush that I think was pretty defining. Can you share that with
It
them?
definitely was a defining moment, and this is, of course, on the heels of our president arriving in Cambridge, Massachusetts yesterday, which was quite an event, as for all of you know, from the police escort that he received and the closing of a lot of the streets. So, something very, very special was happening, and not special in a good way, special in a really terrible way, in America in my junior year of college, academic year 88 to 89. Across America, there were racial incidents that were outrageous. There was a cross burning at Amherst College. There were things that were happening at Yale and at Berkeley and at Stanford. And in the spring of my senior year, in the spring of my junior year at Smith, 2 weeks after I had become president of the student body, there was a note that was left on the door of a woman of color that was one of the most vile things I have ever read in my life. And at that time, the president of the college, Mary Maples Dunn, who, by the way, was at Radcliffe for a while after Smith, so she has a Harvard connection too. Mary stopped the college, all classes stopped, as she asked faculty, staff, and students to have an all-day meeting to talk about what had happened and who we were as a community. And I had just been elected SGA president, and so I was there in a room of thousands of people trying to deal with this issue of diversity and how are we going to think about things. And it was my trial by fire. I'm telling you this story because if I fast forward then to the beginning of my senior year, so the fall of 1989, the First Lady of the United States, Barbara Bush, was invited. I still to this day do not know how this happened, but we don't usually at Smith invite external guests to the opening convocation of a school year. But they invited her to come speak. And the tradition at Smith is the student body president opens up the school year by giving the first words for the opening convocation. And the memory of what had happened that spring with the racial incident was very much in my head. And so when I was thinking about the speech I wanted to give, it was very important to me that I talked about the themes of diversity, the importance of celebrating diversity, the things about honoring different voices, about who we were as a community. And so I gave a speech on those themes, and the First Lady of the United States was there. I escorted her during the day. It was very nice to meet her, but that evening was about Smith, and I gave that speech, and the next day the White House called. And these are pre-Google email days, by the way. Let's just remind ourselves where we were at this time. So the White House calls Smith and says, Barbara Bush really liked Farah's speech. Is it possible for her to have a copy of it? And so we faxed it to the White House. And yes, do faxes even still exist? I don't even know. But what happened my senior year was that she started quoting me all around the country. And it was the bit about diversity. And it was an incredible experience. Because we didn't have Google, because we didn't have Google alerts, and I didn't know how often this was happening, I was getting letters from college presidents all over America saying, Barbara Bush just quoted you, and I was getting it in my mailbox at Smith College, really. But what was remarkable was that I wrote to Mrs. Bush all my senior year. I hand wrote her a letter, and she would handwrite a letter back. And so we had this special correspondence my senior year. And when I was graduating, it was April of my senior year, I wrote her a letter, and I said, Mrs. Bush, what advice do you have to give to a graduating senior? And she said, Farah, I don't know where the jobs are or how to get them, but why don't you come to the White House and meet with me and my chief of staff? It was a yes, it was. She is responsible, absolutely. She is absolutely responsible for my career, without a doubt. She is also someone, and this is an incredible lesson in a moment where our country is going through this partisan craziness. This woman never asked me what party I was affiliated with. She never asked me where I was born. She never asked me who my parents were or how much money I gave to whatever party. She heard my words, and that's an important lesson. It stayed with me, and she was very kind to me and continues to be. But that is the Barbara Bush story. That is how I got my first job out of college.
Okay, and so I don't know how many of you have had a call from the White House, but that's pretty remarkable to me. So you got that call and you went to the White House, and what happened?
So I was very naive, I have to say, because when I went to the White House, so right now, if you on your phone with the swish of your finger, you can pull up an org chart of the US government in a second, and you can drill down and go, this is what this department does, this is the job I want, this is the part of the State Department. I didn't have that on my fingertips. So I remember, I have a vivid memory of sitting with the Chief of Staff, Susan Porter Rose, in her office, and she spread out a diagram that was the US government. And she said, well, where are you interested in, what is interesting to you? And I mean, I had no idea. And so I said, well, I had traveled, I was born in northern India, and I had been fortunate enough that every summer I would go visit my grandfather and my cousins and my aunts and uncles. And so I was very international in scope. And so I said to her, I remember saying, I want to do something international, and I want to do something that makes a difference. Now, those are very, very vague and very broad statements. But my first job was at the U.S. Agency for International Development in the Bush administration in the early 90s, and had an amazing 3 years there. But it was an opportunity for me to see at the highest levels how our government gives economic and humanitarian aid. And it also allowed me to see the impact of our dollars on the ground, because I traveled a lot with my boss. And it gave me, I think, the perspective that gave me the foundation for many of the things that came afterwards.
So often we as women wonder how we can get that first opportunity. And I think as we talked yesterday, you said that first opportunity, you were at the White House, but you were basically filing and collating.
Right. So this is important. Like, we, especially this is it's sort of humbling, right? So I remember thinking to myself, because the first job I had at USAID was not, the head of policy or something. I mean, obviously I'm a college grad. I was doing what college grads should be doing, which is learning. I had a very steep learning curve, and I was in the administrator's office, and for those of you who don't know, that's the head of the U.S. Agency for International Development. So that in of itself was very lucky for me, because I saw the agency from a bird's eye perspective and saw everything that was happening. I also got to meet, because I was in the front office, I was a staffer in the front office, all of the guests that came through, so prime ministers and foreign ministers and various people that were meeting with the head of the agency, which taught me a lot about how our government sort of did work, and I saw the staffing papers and what the briefing papers were going to be for him, and learned a lot about that. But I was answering phones, and I was sending faxes, and I was doing all the things that you need to do, but I was doing things in the best way I knew how. Mm-hmm. And very soon when you do that, people recognize who you are. And very soon after that, they said to me, within the first couple of months, Farah, you really are more qualified for this position. But we got it. We love you here. We love what you're doing. But that position led to a position that I had that was far more substantive as special assistant to the director of policy at USAID. So my last couple of years before graduate school was in a position where I was staffing a principal at USAID, and I was traveling around the world with her, where I learned really what we did on the ground, because I got to see it firsthand.
So I didn't get a chance to say to the women in leadership today, but I have said to my students, and there are some phenomenal ED-LDers in the house as well, that the great philosopher Kenny Rogers has said that you have to know when to hold them, when to fold them, when to walk away, and when to run. So you were setting the world on fire, and yet you decided to leave and go to graduate school. Can you talk to us about why you did that?
One of the things I think is really appropriate, especially here in the department, in the School of Education. The teachers that I had, both at Milton and at Smith, and certainly in other later years, were really instrumental and continue to be mentors for me, if you want to use that word. It's a hard word. I don't exactly know what mentor means. It's a friend. And when I'd finished 3 years at USAID, and I was a political appointee, and so President Bush was no longer going to be president, and a gentleman named Bill Clinton had just been elected. So we knew that it was time for me to leave, and I didn't know what I was going to do, and I went to my boss, who was the dean, had been, the dean of a law school, and so she was an educator. And she pulled me aside and she said, "You're going to school." And I said, "But Catherine," she said, "it is time for you to go to school." I said, "But I don't know what I want to do." Law, business, and MPP. I was all over the place. It was ridiculous. And so she said, "Figure it out, and you need to go to graduate school." And so I applied. It was with her backing and her counsel that I put myself together and took the GMAT and got into school and went to the Fletcher School.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How many of you have gotten that kind of advice? I know that I wouldn't have done some of the things I've done if it wasn't for some phenomenal woman who pretty much said, you will do this.
Exactly.
For my students, when I do this to you, know that it comes from that same place of love. So you went to the Fletcher School, and your degree is
So Fletcher it's a master's in law and diplomacy. It's not a JD, but it is a international relations degree. And I went to Fletcher thinking that I was going to take a specialty in development work, because I'd worked at USAID, and I did not take one class in development at Fletcher. I got to the campus, and I opened up the course catalog, and this is where passion comes in, by the way. What your heart tells you to do, you got to do. And when things begin to jump off a page, and you know your heart starts beating, and you know that is what I want to do, I was moved on international security issues. I was getting excited about reading about this field that I had never, ever thought about. What is international security studies? I mean, I didn't know. But I read the course descriptions, and I was like, I want that one, and that one, and that one, and that one. And I didn't have time for the development classes because my heart was in this. At the same time that professors were saying to me, it was at a moment where the conflict between India and Pakistan over Kashmir was quite heated. It was 93 to 95 that I was at Fletcher. And I am Kashmiri, and so they were very interested in the fact that I was Kashmiri, and aren't you interested in this issue? And I didn't know anything about the issue, and I thought to myself, this is absurd, because earlier that year, 2 of my family members had been assassinated, and so I was thinking to myself, I don't even know enough about what actually happens on the ground over there, and I need to learn more. So it was sort of a dovetailed approach, and I got all the streams of things actually coalesced in a really amazing way. Fletcher was an amazing experience for me, including the fact that my summer between my first and second year at Fletcher, I was given 2 security study grants to be able to go into the region when no Americans were allowed in. It was my James Bond summer. So I interviewed militants and heard from them about why they believed, what they were fighting for. It was when I look back on this now, it was sort of the sparkle of what is insurgency, and how do people get radicalized, and what is extremism? And I didn't even know what all of that was yet. But it was great that it was hard, but it was great that I saw what I saw, because of course, many years later, that ends up to be the field that I'm in.
James Bond summer, I like that. So, we often talk about the Bond girl as the girl that's on the arm of James Bond, but we have with us
I like that.
the woman that was actually in the work. Another ceiling broken. So you finished the graduate work, and you didn't directly go back into government service. What was that detour?
No, and so Catherine Morgan comes back to the table. This is the woman I worked for at USAID in my last part of my tenure there, the one who is the dean of the law school. So when I'm finishing up at Fletcher, and I had focused on the insurgency in Kashmir, and I was doing a lot, I wrote my thesis on it, I called her up, and I said, Catherine, I'm about to graduate from Fletcher. What do you think I should be doing? And she said, Farah, she's in Washington at the time, and I'm calling her from Medford, Massachusetts. And she says to me, do you want to focus on Kashmir? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, do you want to be an expert on Kashmir? Is this your thing? Is this your passion? And I said, well, I'm really passionate about it, but I don't want to spend my life on this issue. I hope it gets resolved. I mean, I don't want to just do that. And she said, well, Farah, if you come here and work for a think tank, you're going to be known as the Kashmir person. And I think, she said, that you need to find out how life works. You have never worked in the private sector. And you need to understand the private sector, because it's not just government that solves problems. You need to see how money is made, and you need to understand how to do it. Go find a job in the private sector. It is the best advice I have ever been given. And I kind of was floored, because a normal person would have said, oh, you just got your master's degree from the Fletcher School, come to Washington, work wherever. And what she did is she made me pause and think. And I stayed in Massachusetts. And I was really unanchored for the first little bit, because I was thinking to myself, what do I do? I volunteered in the mayor's office, actually. He had an international trade office, and I did pro bono work there, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And it was through that, sort of understanding a little bit of business, and Boston being international, I think, maybe, thinking through some of these things, that I was introduced to a new company that was being formed out of a law firm in Massachusetts called Mintz Levin. which is a Boston-based law firm. It's a national firm that was starting a consulting affiliate called ML Strategies. And I had an opportunity to interview with the CEO of the company, who liked me, and I was the second employee. And I stayed at ML Strategies for 7 years. I was vice president of international business for the company. Had an amazing time. Loved the firm. They were exceptional, and I hope we can talk a little bit about why they were exceptional. But Catherine's advice was really important for me, and it has aided me, by the way. That experience in the private sector has aided me so much in the years since, because I've understood how you can solve problems, not just from one route, but the coalitions you need to build to be able to get that done. And one of those pieces of the coalitions are certainly the private sector.
Mm-hmm. And you shared yesterday that it was a wonderful place to work, and you made lots of money, which is not something we often say in the ed sector. But there was something that happened, and we all know what that was,
Yeah.
in September of 1911, that you said compelled you to seek public service. Can you talk about that?
So for sure, and I think for those of us who are here and experienced sort of that perfect sunny morning on September 11th, 2001, we know.
Thank you.
We know what happened. I was working at ML Strategies, and the office was on the 41st floor of One Financial Center, so it was a perfect view to Logan Airport. And I remember it happened where, we're thinking about things, and I remember looking out the window at Logan Airport and thinking to myself with, this sinking feeling, I really hope that this has nothing to do with anybody that's saying Islam or Muslim. I remember feeling that. And of course, we find out in the days afterwards that there's some group called Al-Qaeda that is claiming the religion of Islam and defining my country, America, defining my religion, Islam. I'm an American Muslim, and I felt it very viscerally. And I remember walking into my boss's office and saying, "Steve, I love it here. My family's here. I grew up in Massachusetts. I'm making some good money, but I can't sit here. I've got to find a way to serve. And surely there's something I can do. I really don't care what I do, but I need to serve. You need to help me get to Washington." And I have this degree from the Fletcher School. All these kinds of things, we can figure it away. And what ended up happening was that the firm was amazing. It was amazing on many levels. One, this is a law firm that was founded because way back, 70 years ago, because the Jewish graduates of law schools couldn't find jobs in the Boston Brahmin firms. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing, this is a firm that has a family environment, your family, which I will demonstrate to you. They really mean what they said. And third, there were both Democrats and Republicans at this firm at very senior levels. People had been in government, people connected to government. Cam Carey, John Kerry's brother, worked there. John Markey, Ed Markey's brother, worked there. We also had a lot of other connections on both sides. And when I said I wanted to serve, they corralled around me and said, "How do we get Farah to Washington?" It wasn't she's this or that religion. It's not she was born here or there. Here's an American who wants to serve her nation. We were just attacked. And what happened was Steve Taco wrote a letter to then Chief of Staff Andy Card, who obviously is a Massachusetts man, and said, "You need to meet Farah." And she served in the first Bush administration in the early 90s, and here's her story, and she just wants to do something. And Mr. Card was amazing. Secretary Card, I'd never met him at that time, moved my resume forward, and it took 2 years because I had not worked on any campaign. It's not easy to get it, you can't just flip a switch. But it took 2 years, and fast forward in the summer of 2003, I moved from Boston to Washington to go back to USAID because I knew it, I knew the agency, and they were looking at issues around how we were working with Muslim communities because we were trying to give aid in a post-9/11 world when people didn't trust America. I mean, it was very complex. And here I was working as chief of staff of the largest bureau at USAID that actually touched many Muslim majority countries, so from Morocco to Malaysia. That was my first, when I first left Massachusetts, that's the first job I had.
Okay, and you stayed there for 10
Well, I stayed
years?
in Washington for 10 years, thinking I was only going to stay in Washington for 2, really kind of said goodbye to my friends in Massachusetts, and I'll be back soon. What ended up happening was that I worked at AID for about a year, and went to Kabul in 2004 and was on the ground there for 2 months and lived there. And when I came back, I got a call from the National Security Council, and I, as I just said, did not have any connections at all to the administration because I hadn't worked on the campaign and I didn't know anybody, so I didn't know anybody at the NSC. And they said, you know, we've heard about you and we've heard about your work, and we're interviewing for a position on the staff of the National Security Council that's going to be doing Muslim engagement. And so I had the great privilege of working for 3 years at the National Security Council, where it was one of the most rewarding, hard, but rewarding experiences of my life, not just because of the work that we were doing, but because I was filled with true dedication in terms of the work that I was doing and the people around me who were really working hard to get past some of these narratives that Al-Qaeda and others were putting forward. I worked directly for Elliot Abrams and worked very much in partnership with 2 other individuals, Juan Zarate, who's actually teaching at the law school right now, and a gentleman named Ambassador Dan Freed. And so I was at the NSC working on a bunch of different issues around Muslim engagement loosely. In a context of Bush in the White House. I'm just reminding you of how hard this was at that time and sort of the narratives that were out. Because what ended up happening was when I was at the White House, in 2006, do you all remember the Danish cartoon crisis? Yeah, so that happened.
Some of our guests
don't. Okay, so what happened is basically, and this is something that today in 2014 we get in a second. We get that that when something happens in one part of the world, it ricochets in another. In 2006, we were not quite sure about this. We were really unprepared. We, the global community, were surprised. What happened was there was a newspaper in Denmark that printed, because they believe in freedom of expression like we do and support it as we do, cartoons that were depicting the Prophet Muhammad in not a very nice way and offended many people. Now, we can have a conversation about freedom of speech and those cartoons, but my point in saying that to you is we weren't ready to see the impact of something happening in Copenhagen affecting a life in Kabul. We weren't prepared for that, and we were really surprised. At that point, the Ambassador Dan Freed had been asked to move to the State Department to be the Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Eurasia under then Secretary Rice. She had moved over to be Secretary of State. And Dan had met me at the NSC because I'd been doing work, and he said, come with me to talk to the Danes and the Belgians and the Dutch about what we're doing with Muslim communities, and so I go to Europe with Dan, and I was flabbergasted. I wasn't prepared for the kinds of things I heard. I had gone to Europe, of course, but never as in the context of policy. I'd seen it sort of very much an art culture kind of place. And all of a sudden I'm hearing conversations about immigrants, about Muslims, about them, the us and the them. And I'm shocked. I mean, I really have to tell you, I was really unprepared for that. And they were dealing with the aftermath of how can a country like Denmark, who everybody loves around the world, now be getting, our embassies are being targeted, all these kinds of things are happening. What is actually going on? So what ended up happening was that we, the United States, decided that we were going to do more than we'd ever done before in American history to think about issues in Europe around Muslim communities. We had seen the immigration trends that were happening in Europe, but we were looking at Muslims in a new way. And Dan Freed said, I want you to leave the White House and come work for me at the Department of State to build the programs in our embassies across Western Europe to engage with Muslims. So that's what I did from 2007 to 2009.
Oh my goodness. What were some of the traits that helped you when you later were working more directly on counterterrorism?
So, the part of the job in Europe that I've just described was to build up the counter-narrative to the narrative of Al-Qaeda. And the narrative of Al-Qaeda is kind of simple. There's an us and there's a them. There are all these things that a lot of you are nodding. But there's also an element here of Islam is a monolith. They would like you to believe that all Muslims are the same. Well, clearly that is incorrect. And so when I was in Europe, I had to do a lot of listening. I traveled to 19 countries in 55 cities in 2 years. I was on the ground traveling to places that many senior government officials weren't going. These were
immigrant community centers, these were schools, these were places that we were looking at what people were saying about how they felt about policies of their government. They were pushing back on our government. They were really angry about Iraq. They were really angry about Gitmo. They were really angry about our president. They were really angry about all kinds of things. And as US government, I had to talk with them. So some of the traits that were important were being able to listen, being able to allow somebody to tell you how they feel, and to be able to talk with them. It was not, and I underscore this, an opportunity to win hearts and minds, a terminology I cannot stand. I find it unbelievably offensive. I think the opportunity to open up conversation gives you the opportunity to build trust. And as you build trust, things, you may like us, you may not like us, but there are places where there are common interests. Mm-hmm. And so even in the middle of the Bush administration, I found those places of common interest with the populations in Europe that allowed me to build initiatives with them to do the kinds of things that we needed to do. They may not like our policy in Iraq, they may not like our president, they may be angry that we haven't solved the Israel-Palestinian issue, but they do like this, this, and this, and so they would be willing to work on that common place.
A hallmark of your work has been, as you just stated, a willingness to hear diverse voices in a respectful and engaging way, whether you agree or you didn't agree, or people agreed with you or didn't agree with you. In regard to empowering groups that are so frequently marginalized, can you please speak to us specifically about some of your initiatives, such as Hours Against Hate and Generation Change, and then Viral Peace?
Sure. So this was in a totally different role that I know we'll talk about, but just to jump into the initiatives.
And you can talk about the role.
So, okay, I'll give you some context. When I was leaving the Bush administration at the end of 2008, I knew I was leaving because there's a gentleman named Barack Obama that had just been elected president. I had decided that I was going to write a book about sort of my experiences on how to counter violent extremism, and I was all set to go to a think tank in Washington. And I had the privilege of, in January of '09, going with Dan Fried to brief the new Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. And she was remarkable, obviously, as you can imagine. But I'd never met her before. I'd certainly never briefed her, and it was an opportunity for what she was doing was taking initial steps to kind of get to know some of the subject matters. And so she went to all of the regional bureaus and she said, I'm going to give you an hour just to sort of tell me the grand headlines of things that are going on. And so Dan said to me, hey, look, we're going to be briefing Secretary Clinton. Why don't you come along? I'm bringing the problem children. And I said, okay, great. And thinking, it's crazy. You know, she's not going to be concerned about Muslims in Europe when she's dealing with NATO, the gas pipeline, you know, Russia. I mean, all these things. She's not going to listen to it. So we go to this meeting. We only had an hour. And we're on a round table, and she's on one side of the table, and I'm way down talking, I mean, on the other side. And so she's having a great briefing, and 45 minutes go by, and I'm thinking, there is no way she's going to even get to me. And we were talking about some really serious stuff. There's no way. And everybody, Hillary Clinton, you can imagine, everybody wanted to tell her all these things. So I was waiting patiently, and then she stopped the meeting at 45 minutes, and she said, you know what? This is a lesson a lesson in leadership. She said, I know that I'm going to have a chance to hear in more depth on all these subject matters, but I want to make sure that everybody that came to the table has a chance to speak. I mean, amazing, right? So she turns to me and she said, Farah, what do you tell me about your portfolio? And so I said, Madam Secretary, and then I sort of went off about the things that we were doing in Europe and the things that I had seeded and why we did what we needed to do and why Muslims in Europe were important and how you can't just look at Muslims in the Middle East and there are more Muslims that live outside of the Middle East than in it, and here's what's happening and here's what these people were saying. And the more I'm talking, the more she's leaning forward. And as she's leaning forward, her eyes are really wide and she's asking amazing questions. So we're going back and forth. She's asking, she's engaged, she gets it, she totally gets it. And so I was happy. And so my boss was sitting next to her, and so he says to her,
I don't know if everybody around the table was happy.
No, but we didn't go on forever. No, it was good.
It's wonderful. It's
So
wonderful.
as I finished, there's a pause, and Dan, said to her, Madam Secretary, when Farah leaves, because he was about to say, her going away party is like in a week. She put her hand on Dan's arm, and she pushed him back, and she leaned forward, and she said, where are you going? And there was pin drop silence in the room. I was just like, oh my God. And so I said, Madam Secretary, and I told her where I was going to go, and she just looked at me and she said, we will see about that. And I thought to myself, oh my God, did I really just hear that? But also, I honestly have to tell you, I thought to myself, there is no way she means this, because the minute she finds out I'm a political appointee in the Bush administration, and the minute she finds out I worked for the father, as well, no way, not going to happen, which is not what happened. Again, 20 years from the Barbara Bush thing to this moment in time, literally 20 years. And I feel blessed. The two First Ladies cared enough to listen to what I had to say. They came to me the day after that and said, she wants you to stay, and what is it going to take to keep you here? And I said, when the Secretary of State asks you to serve your nation, you salute. And of course I'll stay, but you need to use me. Use me. Take the experience that I've had and do something with it. Because President Obama wants to do something really big with Muslims, and how can we do something? So what she did was she created, for the first time in American history, the role of the special representative to Muslim communities, and that's what I was. I feel honored to have had that privilege. But we designed the role based on what I had seen and done in Europe. So there were components that were really important here. One is, and this is vintage Hillary Clinton, civil society matters, right? So it was people to people. There's a lot going on at the State Department, government to government, which is important. But she wanted me to talk to people and do the kinds of stuff that I was telling you about earlier. Second, it was really important for me. I told her how important it was for us to globalize this effort, that it wasn't just one region of the world, because a Muslim living in Surabaya, Indonesia, is as Muslim as a Muslim living in Stockholm, is as Muslim as a Muslim living in Suriname. And we cannot have a hierarchy of which voices are more important, that everybody deserves dignity. And so first, people to people, second, global, and the third, which is really important, especially for all of you, it was youth focused. So everything were young people under the age of 30, because most Muslims actually in the world are under the age of 30. So that's the context of your question. I'm sorry it took so long.
No.
The initiatives that we seeded were many. But some of these initiatives all of them, were around bringing voices forward. That the credible voices are not the government, the credible voices are people. So how can we as the US government, act as the convener and the facilitator and the intellectual partner with the ideas that we hear on the ground? And so what we did is we built networks around the world, both online and offline, that connected voices. So I was basically talent scouting around the world for amazing voices, amazing people who were doing great things. So the social entrepreneur in Malaysia, the activist in Oslo, Norway, the graffiti artist in Bahrain, whoever, whatever, they were credible voices. How do we connect them? So some of these initiatives that you talked about were about that. And it was important on the dignity side, because you framed it in terms of how do you listen to these voices, to not have preconceived notions of who is the right person to speak to. Mm-hmm. If you are doing your job right, you're going deep and you're going wide, and you're listening to a wide variety of voices. What we, the global community, tends to make crazy mistakes. The loudest voice is always the voice that must be right. And we have preconceived notions in my field of who the right Muslim is, right? The guy with the longest beard and the highest hat is the guy who has authenticity. I'm sorry, no. I want to hear from what's credible within those communities. So we're building these networks that are allowing alternative narratives to come forward, which is allowing young people to see a different vision of who they can be and who they are. Mm-hmm. That everything is not, as Al-Qaeda says, a monolith. That there is diversity in Islam, mm-hmm. in the way culture impacts the way people live. Mm-hmm. So the Generation Change initiative that we launched, I call the generation under the age of 30 Generation Change. They're change makers. And we built chapters around the world of these young people who would never have known each other before. We connected them on Facebook. But our embassies were doing the work and getting to know these people and training them and teaching them leadership skills and communication skills so that they can move their stories forward and out. So that somebody who's doing something amazing in Nouakchott, Mauritania, can be connected to somebody in Kuala Lumpur. You know, I mean, it was really important that we gave the opportunity to young people, peer-to-peer, who are already digital natives, already understand that I don't care if you are a Spaniard and you have a good idea versus somebody who is from Brazil. give me the power of your idea. What is the power of idea? And I think that there is, in fact, a youthquake happening around the world, that young people are, in fact, sharing their ideas and they are ricocheting around the world. So what we did with her blessing was to build these initiatives that allowed young people to speak. So that's what we did.
You've shared two phenomenal stories with me about two young people. Can you share that with the audience?
Sure.
And
So
then we're
two
gonna open
generation
up.
changers that are well, there are many. There are dozens and dozens, and I could spend all afternoon with you talking about the different, and the two stories I will share right now. One of the things that I think is very powerful is that when you use the stage of the United States government to lift up a voice and allow that to sort of permeate in a different way, not to bless it and say this is a US government voice, but to simply show it to the world and walk away, okay? Because there's credibility in that. And one of the ways we did that was really when I was on the ground working with our embassies, getting to know a wide range of people. There was a young man in Uganda who grew up, there is a young man in Uganda who grew up in a slum, one of the worst slums I have ever visited, and I've visited quite a few in my life. And this is a slum that was predominantly filled with HIV/AIDS. And it was a slum in which there were many, so his father married many wives, and he wasn't sure sort of all of his family members and who was what and where, and so it was very complicated for him growing up. And at age 10, he decided it would be better for him, that it would be safer for him, he'd have a better life if he wasn't in the slum and he was actually on the streets. So at age 10, he leaves the slums and he goes to the streets and he begins to sell like scrap metal and little bits of string and little bits of, buttons that he finds. He's selling little things so he can make some money so that he can buy books so he can learn how to read. And he learns how to read. He comes and he realizes, he says, in his words, that, I learned how to read, but I realized that my brothers and sisters in the slum don't know how to read. And why do I get that privilege and they don't? So what does he do? He comes back to the slums and opens up the first school in the slums to teach people how to read. I mean, amazing story. He started an NGO that is raising money for this school, and they're teaching young children in the slums how to read. Now, it's a great story. I met him. I'm in Kampala. It's wonderful, and it could have been a one-off. And because of programs like this, because of the ability to sort of connect different things, it so happened that we had developed a wonderful relationship with the Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville, Kentucky, Muhammad Ali the boxer, who is very youth-focused and has built programs, educational programs and leadership programs for kids around principles that he thinks are core leadership principles, like respect and confidence, things that are part of his DNA. And so they were going to do a humanitarian award last year for the first time ever, giving awards to young people all over the world who display some of these characteristics. And so they were working with our office to develop, some names to put. So we went to all of our embassies around the world and gave them a lot of names from which to choose, and Muhammad Karisi was selected. So he comes to Louisville, Kentucky. He meets Muhammad Ali. Christina Aguilera is there, John Bolton is there, it's like a big thing. But the amazing part about this is that his story is now told on a global stage that is not connected to the US government, it's connected to something totally different. And imagine the impact and influence of that. So that's one story. Another is this wonderful man who's an American named Muhammad, who grew up in Minneapolis. And he is part of our Generation Change America, and he is a rock star. He's amazing. And he believed in this idea of the leadership building and the connecting of voices, and so he said to us, look, America can't go to Somalia to get Somali youth to learn these skills and to be out there, but I can. And so he went to Mogadishu and started a Generation Change chapter. And his TED Talk is online, so you should take a look at it.
It's amazing,
Yeah.
just amazing. Got all of these wonderful women in this audience. When you think about women in leadership, what are 1, 2, or 3 things that you can tell all of us as women of different eras that you think will help us in our quest to be not only relevant, but to have impact?
So it's a great question. I think there are some very basic things on the table for all of us as humans to think about, whether you're female or you're male. It obviously doesn't matter. I just think this issue of dignity is a very central one. My mother is a physician, retired now, pulmonologist, and she ran a hospital, a county hospital in Braintree, Massachusetts, which at the time was called Norfolk County Hospital. And she came to America in 1969 with me as a baby. But my mother worked for the county, so she was a government employee. And I remember asking my mom at a very young age, because a lot of and this is not to put anybody in a bad way, but a lot of people came to America as doctors and entered into private practice and made a lot of money, you know. But I remember saying to my mom, why are you working so hard? And I mean, everything that she, you know, she worked really hard at the hospital, and, you know, my parents divorced when I was 10, so she was raising me and my little brother on a you know, particular salary. And I remember saying to her, why did you choose this? Why are you doing this? And she said, Farah, everybody deserves dignity. Everybody deserves to have the chance to get the best health care. Everybody deserves, I mean, those themes of everyone counts, that public service is important, that it isn't about only, and money is important, and I hope that we all make a lot of it, but it is that there are other things too that sort of mesh in your life that are important. So one aspect, I guess, in answering your question is, how do you find dignity in the spheres that you're in, whatever you happen to do? I've just told a whole bunch of stories about ways I hoped to do that in the job that I did at the State Department and at the White House, but I think the second thing is something that I talked about in terms of why I did what I did, and that's the passion piece. And you know, you hear this all the time, and I absolutely believe it, and I tell young women all the time. I think we have frameworks. We have this conversation in America right now that is really awful, I think. It's this conversation about, can you have it all? And it's this conversation about work and life balance, like and I don't get it. For me, I hope that your life and your work is filled with passion. I hope that the thing that you do in your life for work is fulfilling and it gives you joy. So it is not like, oh, I got to go to work today. It's a joy for you to do this. And maybe I sound like Pollyanna, but I was working on really hard issues. I mean, hard issues, emotional issues, but I loved what I did. And I had no issues at all with the sort of the component, as some people would say, gosh, you sacrificed this to do this. I loved what I was doing, and I really enjoyed that. So the second thing I would say is to follow your passion. And the third is certainly around sort of this coalition building. I think that we try to solve problems sometimes just by ourselves. And if I learned anything in the decade that I've served in government, it is obviously you cannot do it alone. That you have got to find partners that come in bizarre shapes and sizes, that are your intellectual partners in what you want to do. And I will tell you, you know, I would never have been able to do any of the things that I did alone. I didn't do it by myself. It was the teams of people that I built within the interagency, absolutely, but also the NGOs, the universities, the foundations, the folks I've met in the field, so to speak, who were rallying around the issues that I was doing that allowed me to do what it is I did.
Mm-hmm. Well, I could sit up here for the remainder of the evening just talking to Farah and getting more stories about these phenomenal people, but that's really selfish of me. So I'm going to stop at this point. There are microphones. One is over here and one is over there, and open it up to you. The only thing that I would ask of you is that you ask a question. Indicate who you are, but then ask a question. You'll have an opportunity at the reception to tell her how phenomenal you are and all that you want her to know about you. But let's continue this conversation and open it up to all of you. So, Mike over there and Mike over there. Thank you so much for pouring the tea.
I have a question, but I won't try that.
No, they're taping it, so it really helps.
You're not off the hook.
I'm Juliana, and thank you. And my question is, where is your book? You said that in this journey, you would plan to write a book or wanted to write a book, and have you done that? Is that still in the works? And where are you in that process? Where is this book that?
So this is not a plant. I swear this is not a plant. Thank you for asking the question. I have come to Harvard to take a breath and to get myself together so that I can prepare my proposal so I can write a book. So thank you. And it is not going to be the same book that it would, obviously, that I would have written then. They will have themes of countering violent extremism, of course, because I think a whole lot, I mean, we could spend hours talking about what hasn't been done in this world. But I want to give the voices of the young people that I've met in more than 80 countries around the world some traction. I get very frustrated by the one-dimensional conversation that we're having around the themes that we've talked about this afternoon. Even in this so-called sophisticated moment in time, all these years after 9/11, it pains me greatly to hear the narrow interpretations of a lot of things and this absurd conversation we're having about what the threat is. You know, as a Massachusetts native, when I turned on the TV on April 15th and saw what I saw on Boylston Street, you know, we all felt it in a really serious way.
Everyone won't know what that is.
So the Boston bombing happened on April 15th of last year. So I think about the fact that some of these themes have really come home here to me. So I want to talk about this in a really unedited way. I want to be able to talk about things without worrying that I'm going to insult people. I want to be able to talk freely. I don't mean it like that. I mean it in terms of the confines of being a U.S. government spokesperson when you're in the field. I want to talk very candidly about the trends that are happening around the world with Muslim youth. I want to talk about how we, as citizens of any race, any color, any creed, any religion, can work on these issues together. We cannot eradicate a poisonous ideology if we simply hang out and just wait for it to go away. There are things that we can absolutely do together, and so I want to talk about some of those things.
Great question. Thank you so much. And others can just line up if you have questions. You don't have to wait.
Well, thank you for your inspiring remarks. So how can, Anita from NYU, how can we on our college campuses come together, carry out your mission at a grassroots level in terms of getting behind our student bodies to support the things that you're doing?
So did you say NYU?
Yes, and we have we'll talk offline.
Terrific. No, I was just going to give you a compliment. I went to NYU a couple of years ago. I can't remember what year it was. Anyway, to give a presentation with a Boston-based NGO called Facing History and Ourselves, and had an incredible time. And I want to thank you and your school for that. I also want to tell you that I know that you have a center at NYU that focuses on preserving archaeological antiquities, and I'll get to why that's important in a second as well. So what can you do? I think, first of all, being able to do this sort of conversation in a way that's comfortable for young people, so you're hearing the themes that are going on. A young person isn't always, look, I could talk to you about what they've said to me. You can hear me, but it will be far more impactful if you hear it from them, right? I would open the doors for that conversation. There is, no matter where in the world I've gone, young Muslims are facing an identity crisis, okay? In a post-9/11 context, they have grown up every day with the word Islam or Muslim on the front page of a paper online and offline, and it has impacted them greatly. So hear their stories. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is, really this idea of a monolith has got to be eradicated. And anything that you can do as educators to get into the space of the diversity of Muslims around the world would be very helpful, including the lexicon we use. There is a reason why my title was Special Representative to Muslim Communities. It's a very long title. It's very complicated. Everybody would want to say Muslim world, and we did not, because communities matter. So I would urge you to do that as well. Thank you for that question.
Hi, Deborah.
Hi.
Nice to have you here, Farah. My name is Delara. Most people in the world who are either marginalized or live under the poverty line are women and children. So having visited 80 countries and seen many different kinds of people, if there were 2 policies that you could develop that would lift and support the development and the education of women and children, what would they be?
So that's a great question.
She's one of my students.
I can see that. I feel like I'm on the hot seat for a
Brilliant
thesis.
women,
a
just
thesis,
brilliant women, just
you know,
surrounded
I don't even
by
know
them.
what. Look, I mean, obviously the answer is education. I mean, clearly. And if I had a magic wand and could offer education to every human on this planet, we would do so. That is the baseline for so much of the complexity that you've talked about. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would absolutely say, as we look at sort of women and girls, many of the threads that we heard Hillary Clinton talk about as Secretary of State in initiatives that Ambassador Melanne Verveer put forward as the first ever ambassador at large for global women's empowerment were important. Sort of global security, health, education, all of these strands make a difference. So that's very important. And the third thing, you said two, but I'm going to give you the third. And it's why I feel really proud to have been part of this project. You heard in my bio that I was one of the key architects of something called the Women in Public Service Project. And that is an initiative that was launched in 2010 to get more women into public service globally. So by the year 2050, we want 50% of the world's, we want 50% of all jobs in the world that are public servant jobs to be filled by women. That is a great goal, and it's a needed goal. But it means that every country on earth ought to do more to put women into public service, both policy and politics.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Another
Short
one of my
here.
cherubs.
Yes, also a proud student of Deborah's. Thank you so much. So what you've been talking about really resonates because global competency for American students and global exposure is my passion. And so I'm wondering when you're speaking, are there also initiatives to help bring in children or youth from Muslim communities in the U.S. or not from Muslim communities to be able to be exposed to all of these youth initiatives all over the world to make sure that they're part of the dialogue, which sometimes it seems like they're not?
Okay, so I think I heard your question right, if I didn't get it right. So the State Department doesn't work on programs within the lines of our country here. We do have programs in general in which Americans go overseas and sort of do international visitor and exchanges and that kind of thing. There are also all kinds of education programs that are out there, but specifically on getting young kids to learn more about the world. You heard in the Cairo speech President Obama talk about sort of this transparency and this idea of connecting the world from Kansas to Cairo, right?
Yep.
And so there are a lot of initiatives there that are sort of these using technology to get into the classroom. And that's not happening only through the Department of State. That's happening with organic partnerships that have been built in a wide range of ways. Can we do more? Absolutely. I actually don't think you need a framework by government to do this. I think that sort of makes it harder. I think it's much easier as educators to make sure that every element of everything that you're talking about has a global component. So you're not waiting for Thursday of week 3 of session 2 to talk about the world. The world is everywhere. The world is right here. So when you are talking about things that are happening, you bring in that component. And I will also and always say, with this generation of young people, that have the ability to sort of see the world with Google Maps, with as much technology that you can bring in so that they're seeing images, so that their faces of these people are not based on irregular ideas, but they're seeing firsthand. And finally, I don't have a list for you, but I know that there are many NGOs in which they do this sort of pen pal kind of thing online. There's got to be a way as educators that you can sort of embed that into some of the things that you're doing. Thank you for the question. It's great.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Andrea. I'm in the Education Policy and Management program here, and thank you very much for being here. You talked about your experience at Smith as being a place where you learned how to lead, and I'm curious to know more about that, but also to all of the work that you've done with youth. I'm just wondering, what are the experiences that you feel like are the most effective in helping young people learn how to be leaders?
You don't learn if you don't practice. And I practiced a lot at Smith in things that I was interested in. And I had the chance to be able to experiment with leadership without sort of the, oh my gosh, you're going to fail and therefore you're not going to get whatever job. You cut your teeth in different ways, certainly at Milton too, but it was sort of at Smith where I was really very active on campus. I was involved in a lot of different groups, and I was asked to do a lot of things, and I liked it. I liked that idea. And so the confidence that you build, it's sort of a momentum that is built within you, that you feel very comfortable in doing that. So it wasn't one particular leadership thing that led to this or led to it was sort of a recognition that I can do this, I can try this out, I can see what I think about this, and I'm in a community that will allow me to experiment with leadership in that way. So it was a very good experience for me. That's not singular to Smith, certainly. I think what we have to be doing is teaching young people that it is okay. I have to tell you what's been so interesting for me at the IOP, talking to the undergrads, is to hear them speak about this sort of consistent pressure that they are under to be perfect, that everything online is going to be seen someday for their job, that when do you have the chance to fail? I thank God I failed as many times as I failed. And I mean, my gosh, I'm sounding like everything led to, there was a lot of muckiness in the middle, you know, and that opportunity, that's leadership too, by the way. When you fail, you learn. You learn about yourself, and you learn about things that you may not know about. So that's the leadership. I'm sorry, what was the second piece?
I was just wondering how we can teach that to young people, like in the work that
so
you've done with youth. How do you create experiences that allow them to develop that?
Well, I
leadership?
think even if it is not a prescribed sort of if you do this, you're going to get this, you're going to get this, but teaching them a wide definition of leadership, that leadership means many, many, many different things, and not to put everything in that bucket, but to really begin to talk about the different kinds of leaders that you see, because some people are going to see Eleanor Roosevelt and they're going to say she is a leader. Another person is going to see Steve Jobs. Another person is going to see their teacher. Another person, you know, it really, and so the most I would say that we can do is to broaden that spectrum so that leadership means many things. And again, you're giving dignity to different kinds of leaders that are out there.
I would just add, I know this was a question for Farah, but I would add to this that each one of us in the room also have the responsibility of being one of the people that opened doors for Farah. I mean, if Barbara Bush hadn't opened that door, you wouldn't have gotten the call from the White House. I met Barbara Bush at an activity in Richmond, and in hindsight, I wish I had been nicer. But all jokes aside, there were lots of people in her story, this phenomenal story, because you were good at what you did, because you were a risk taker and cared greatly about important things, people opened up the door for you and made space. I think for people that are closer to my age than yours, one of our responsibilities is to find ways to make that space for you so that you can demonstrate leadership in a way that is safe, that where we can support you, nurture you, give you feedback, help you when you stumble, and then propel you on your way. And I didn't mean any disrespect to anybody who's not one of my students, but that is something that I work on really hard with my students, and they know that they are loved and supported, and that I'm going to work them hard because I expect great things from them. So.
No pressure.
No pressure. Oh, no pressure. Speaking of which.
Hi, my name is Suchi Saxeta, and I'm a second-year doctoral student in the program in education leadership. So I'm a graduate of Wellesley College, which I loved, and at Wellesley, we talked about leadership a lot, and I think the thing that I found remarkable since leaving Wellesley is that now that there's conversations, even here at the Ed School, which is about 85% women, we have conversations about leadership, and then we have conversations about women's leadership, which I think is a really interesting distinction. And so I'm curious in your experience, and since the topic of this, becomes, it's adjacent to a women's leadership conference, what do you think, is there a distinction between leadership and women's leadership, and why do you believe that distinction continues to exist?
What a great question. It's a really great question, and it goes back a little bit to sort of this complexity that we're having in America about what it means to be female and be a professional and be a mother and be a partner and be a whatever, all the other things that this identity thing that we're dealing with in the United States. I will tell you that I think that there are some definite characteristics that are special about a wide variety of women, not every woman, but a wide variety of women. But I also know for a fact that what you just said about opening up doors doesn't happen because, I mean, I happen to mention Catherine Morgan, a woman. I also mentioned Steve Tocco, a man. It isn't one or the other that helps things happen along. Leadership for me is not about gender. Leadership for me is about the skills that go into developing the momentum and the vision that needs to happen. And are you building the kind of ecosystem that you have been asked to build? And that is not, in my view, a gender thing. Now, do I think that there are certain areas where, in many cases, there is an element that is seen because a female is actually asking a different kind of question? Sure, and there's a lot of data out there that will tell you that. But that's why I think, actually, the kind of teams that you build have to be gender neutral. I think you need to have men and women together to solve policy issues. I don't think you should be sitting around a table with only men, nor, by the way, do I think you should be sitting around a table with only women. I think we should be getting different diverse perspectives on the issues that we're dealing with. I think it's really important.
Some of our colleagues who are in the Women in Leadership Institute have shared the difficulty it is sometimes in having your voice rise to the fore when you are in a group with men. If a man, this is a generalization, but all too frequently, if a man says it's brilliant, if a woman says it first off, it's passed over, and then it's later repeated by a man and it's brilliant. Those kinds of things happen even as we are attempting to be gender neutral and be focused in our leadership. Did you have experiences like that, and how did you break through so that people could hear what Farah brought to the table and focus on ideas and not gender, especially as a Muslim woman?
Yeah, you know, everybody wants me to tell you some horrible story that has happened to me, and I don't have any horrible stories to tell you. I have been very lucky. In all of the policy discussions that I've had, in all of these journeys that I've told you about, I never once felt as though, boy, my voice wasn't heard at all. I was treated with dignity. I was treated with respect. If anything, you know, I happen to be a pretty confident person, and I know for a fact that if I started getting the runaround, I know what kind of reaction I would have. You don't have to be mean, but you certainly can say, I'm sorry, I said, whatever, I would do that. I didn't need to. In terms of being Muslim, again, I never ever felt that, and I think it has a lot to do with sort of the identity questions that we think about as ourselves. I went to a school, Milton was in my formative years, where no one ever focused, this is not, by the way, what is happening to young kids in America today, by the way, but when I was growing up in Massachusetts, as somebody who happened to be Muslim, the most I would get would be, why don't you eat pork? You know, and occasionally, why don't you drink alcohol? Okay? But it was, oh, that's a religious thing, that is it. There was never any sort of complexity around those issues. I think about my friends from Milton Academy, who are still very close to me now, the 10 closest folks that I have. You know, none of them are Muslim, Jewish and Christian, Catholic. I went to a lot of masses when I was young. A lot of different, I mean, I'm from Massachusetts, you know, and for me, I felt like I was from Massachusetts, and I have as much right to be here as anybody else, so I didn't have that sort of sense of things. But again, I was very privileged in that experience, because I absolutely know that that is not true for others at times.
We have 2 colleagues in our Leadership Institute who are here from the United Arab Emirates, and they have talked just in this one day about making sure that their voice is heard.
Yeah.
And so for many of us, we're not that privileged. One of the things, though, that I have heard you say yesterday and today is that there were people who opened the door. So when Secretary Freed,
Assistant Secretary Freed.
Assistant Secretary Freed brought you to the table,
Yep.
it validated your place at the table.
Absolutely.
When somebody like Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton said to you, I want to hear what you have to say, that validated your voice in a very, very powerful way. And so to piggyback on your answer, I reiterate that those of us, that have acquired any level of position or power in an organization, I think have the responsibility to ensure that we open that door, that we signal clearly, no, I want to hear what she has to say, or that she has to say, because it messages so powerfully to those of us who maybe don't have that entree or haven't had experiences where we are affirmed in finding our voice.
I couldn't agree with you.
And I don't want you to have horror stories. They know I've had enough for you and me. So, other questions? Aha moments, thoughts? We're coming to a close. Sure.
Hi, I'm Dara. I'm a first-year doctoral student in the Doctor of Education program, and I was just wondering, when you were talking about your experience in Europe, it seemed like there was kind of a conflict coming in as a representative of the U.S. government to talk about Muslim issues in a third country, in a different country. Did you ever face any tension kind of as the American representative in the room, and how did you deal with that?
So remember that, thank you, that's a great question. Are you sure you're not doing foreign affairs? It's very good. So as you can imagine, when you represent your country in any way, shape, or form, you are representing your country, right? And overseas, I was always looked at as U.S. government. I could never and should never, you don't put your hand on the oath and take the office that you're taking if you're trying to be yourself. You're U.S. government, and you have to remember that. Towards that end also, by the way, our Constitution, when you give your oath, you swear to defend the Constitution of the United States. And in the Constitution of the United States is the line between church and state. And so I say that to you because oftentimes when I'm in community meetings or I'm in a school or whatever, folks will want to ask me questions about religion. Or what do you think about Islam? Or what do you think as a Muslim about this particular thing? And were they right here? And as U.S. government, I never, ever crossed that line, right? I'm not here to talk about the Quran. I'm not here to talk about what this says or what that says. I'm not, because that is not part of who we are as Americans, right? That we have a line between church and state. So was it complex in Europe in that job, and certainly in the job as special representative around the world? Absolutely, because oftentimes, the conversation would be around U.S. foreign policy, about issues that they had that they were really upset about perspectives that they had that sometimes were hard for them and emotional. Other times people were really angry. So it's hard. These are human things. And when you're dealing with humans and who are upset, I mean, look, the framework of this is 9/11. It is hard. I mean, I don't know if anybody in this room lost anybody on 9/11 or knows somebody who was killed. You don't know what you're dealing with when you're in audiences. You don't know how it feels. So you have to try to be sensitive to some of these issues. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had around the world where Muslims have come to me in tears, sobbing, and saying, this man, meaning Osama bin Laden, is incorrectly defining our religion. And I have to spend the rest of my life dealing with this. Or my child is dealing, I have had dozens of stories like that. It's heart-wrenching, So this is hard stuff. This is complex stuff. But as U.S. government, I was very proud of the country. I am very proud of the country that we live in, about the Constitution that we have. And the final point I'll make, which is something that was really important for me contextually, and there is a connection to Harvard.
Okay.
One of the things that I think is really, and this goes back to the question too about what you can teach in the classroom, I was very privileged in my education. And yet, I knew so little about Islam in America. I didn't know what presidents had said about Islam and Muslims. I didn't know who did what, when, where. I didn't know any. There was no context. One of the first things I did as special representative was work with a woman named Precious Muhammad, who went to Harvard. And she was a historian. She was a history major here. And I said to her, Precious, I need a timeline. I need a timeline of American presidents, Islam, and diplomacy, so that when people ask me these questions, I'm not saying, as they will say to you, Islam just came here, or you're the new, that we can go back and understand the history. History is so important. Precious spent 2 years developing a timeline that is one of a kind It is phenomenal, and we've given it to the Smithsonian, actually, okay? But it goes back to our founding fathers. She has the words of our founding fathers and what they said about Muslims and Islam, and moved all the way through all of our presidents, whether it's Eisenhower or Carter or Ford or Clinton or Bush or Obama, and talked about the fact that American presidents, this is what they said. And by the way, they said wonderful things. There isn't one president of the United States that did anything, said anything, in a way that disrespected the religion of Islam. I'm proud of that as an American and as a Muslim. But it's important for us also to understand where Islam, when it came to America, it came with the slaves. It has been part of our country since the founding of our nation. So to be able to embed that story, that framework, as I tell these hard stories overseas is a really wonderful thing. So with the emotion comes sort of the marriage of the sort of the factual as well. But it all comes back to sort of who we are as Americans and what we stand for in our Constitution.
So, this is the first time that I've gotten to choose someone to speak at an Askwith forum. And I think that I did a phenomenal job in bringing to HGSE the Honorable Farah Pandith.
Thank you. Very sweet. Very, very sweet.
And Kathy, if you're watching this, we
Hi,
love
Kathy.
you. We love you, we love you, we love you. So thank you all for joining us at this intimate tea. I don't know where your cups are, but if you'll come with us over to the reception, we promise that we will have something there for you that might be just as delicious and maybe even a little bit better. Are there any instructions as to what goes next, Mideline? We are going across to the reading room, first floor, Gutman. For those of you that are students here, if you're coming over, you may see some of your friends. I'm sorry, this is not an opportunity for you to say to them, there's a party over here, and come on in. This is just for you.
Can I ask you to do one
Sure.
thing? For those of you who are on Twitter, my Twitter handle is Farah, F-A-R-A-H, _Pandith, P-A-N-D-I-T-H. Follow me on Twitter. You'll learn more about this stuff. And for those of you who may or may not have taken pictures, tweet them and add I'd like to be able to send this out because I thought this was a really fun conversation. The questions were really terrific. Thank you for the opportunity.
They were wonderful. Again,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.
And you will have an opportunity to talk one-on-one, to take pictures with, to learn a little bit more of how you do some of the phenomenal things that she did if you come on over to the reception. Thank you so much. You were phenomenal.
You did a fabulous job. Are you kidding me?